Having multiple camera angles in your interview can make your film feel way more dynamic, and more importantly, it could save your. But the question is, how do you effectively film multiple camera angles with only one camera? And that is the secret that I'm gonna share with you guys today. I'm gonna help you guys make your interviews feel way more dynamic and help your editor out as well. The trick to shooting these interviews with only one camera and actually pulling it off effectively is to make sure that you're extremely organized and prepared for your shoot. Believe it or not, the first step to being able to pull off a multi-camera interview with only one camera starts before you even touch your camera, and that is by properly planning out your interview questions. And what I mean by this is separating your questions by the different feelings and moods that you're trying to convey in this interview. And then once I have all of these questions separated, I'll then write a note of what angle I want for each particular question. So for example, what I'll do is for the more emotional and intimate questions, I'll make a note that I want a tight shot. And then for questions that are a little bit lighter, that I want to feel a little bit less intense and dramatic, I'll make a note that I want something that's a little bit wider. When I get to my location, I typically take my camera and I start to find a few possible spots that I want to shoot my interview in. I usually choose my interview spot based off of a few different things. The first thing I'm always looking for is if that space is quiet enough to capture good, clean audio. And then the second thing I'm looking for is a background that I can easily manipulate. And then the third thing that I'm looking for, and this might be a little bit nitpicky, but is there symmetry in the background? Is there something that I can create some sort of balance in my framing and in my composition? Because the last thing that you want is a background that's too busy and takes away from the focus of your main character. You also want to make sure that your location reflects the theme of the interview. So if you're shooting an interview that's really light and happy, maybe you want to choose a location with a lot of windows and natural lighting. And of course, if you're shooting something like a true crime documentary, then maybe you want to shoot something a little bit darker and a little bit moodier. Now, once I choose my location, I am now ready to frame up my shot. I think it's extremely important before you start the interview, I like to let my subject know exactly what the deal is. I let them know that I'm trying to get a multi-camera interview with only one camera, and I be completely honest with them. I say to them, hey, look, I'm gonna shoot a couple of these questions a few times to make sure that I can capture it from a couple of different angles to make this interview a little bit better and more dynamic. It's very important that you let them know this, because if you ask them the same question more than once, they might start to feel like either A, you don't know what you're doing and you've already asked that question, or B, they might think that their response wasn't good enough and then they start to get a little bit nervous, or they start to feel a little bit anxious while they're answering that interview question. But you just let them know straight up, like, I'm gonna ask that question a couple of times. Maybe you give me a different answer, maybe you don't. But most importantly, you let them know that you're trying to make the best possible interview that you can. Now, once I know that they're comfortable and they're ready to start the interview, I set up my first camera angle. The first angle that I get is my master shot. And the master shot is gonna go through the entire interview from start to finish, and this is gonna be the only camera that does this. Typically for my master shot, I like to shoot something wide with a good amount of headroom that can be flexible for all the different kinds of emotions that our subject is gonna experience as we go through this interview. After I'm confident with the angle of my master shot, I then start setting up lighting. Now, my first step to lighting is shut off any house lights in the location that you're in, and that's mainly because these lights are typically cheap and they're tungsten lights that never really look good on skin. Now, in this particular location, there is a ton of natural light coming in from the windows in almost every single direction. But in order to properly light our subject without blowing out the windows, we're gonna use 6 stops of ND to properly expose for the outside windows. But in order to light our subject, we're gonna need a really strong, powerful light source. That is why on most of my interviews, I use this GVM 650B. This is a bicolored light that can go from 2700 Kelvin all the way up to 6800 Kelvin and provides 21,600 lux. Basically, this light is extremely powerful. There are many different ways to light a scene, but typically, I tend to put my key light at about a 45-degree angle away from my subject, and then I add a hair light behind my subject on the opposite side of my key light. And depending on the interview, I might add some negative fill on the opposite side of my key light just to add a little bit more shadow and depth to my subject's face. Now, I might add some additional lights to the background just to bring up the exposure levels of the room, but this is highly dependent on the style that you're trying to achieve for your interview. Now, before you finish placing your lights, I highly suggest that you take your camera and you just kind of float around the area in some different possible camera angles that you might want to use and see if the lights are interfering with those camera angles. If they are, then I would try to adjust your lighting according to the second, third, and fourth camera angle that you're trying to achieve. Once you have your lighting set, it is now officially time to set up your audio. Audio is without a doubt one of the most important aspects of the interview process. I usually like to have two sources of audio being recorded on two separate audio devices. For example, I like to have my lav mic set up on an external audio recorder like a Zoom or a Tascam, and then I'll run my shotgun microphone straight into my camera. That way I have two separate audio recordings, and if anything goes wrong with either one of them, I have a backup just in case. Now, a good rule of thumb to set up your shotgun microphone is to have it placed about 3 to 5 feet away from your subject, obviously out of frame, and you want the angle of the shotgun microphone to be pointing at your subject's mouth. After I have my audio set up, I make sure that I test both audio devices and make sure that the volume is set appropriately. And then I'll just ask my subject a few different questions just to properly set the audio levels. A good rule of thumb is to make sure that your audio is peaking between -6 and -3 dB. If your audio is below -6 dB, then you might want to turn it up. If it's above -3 dB, then you definitely want to turn it down. That sweet spot in the middle will allow you to have the best possible audio recording. Once you go through the entire interview with your master shot, it is now time to set up for the second, third, and fourth camera angle. It's very important that before you move on from your master shot, you make sure that you get every single question on that list, and you also make sure that their answers are actually good and usable. Typically for my second camera angle, I'll usually choose something that's a little bit tighter on my subject's face, so that way I can really hone in on that character's emotion, and I have something nice to cut to from a wide to a close-up. Usually for the second camera angle, I tend to use like a 50mm or even an 85mm just to make the two camera angles feel different. And then for my third camera angle, I like to have a camera that has a little bit of movement. So I might go ahead and fire off a few questions just while I'm going handheld, and my goal is to give a little bit of camera movement, but also capture things like hands and any other interesting shot that I might see while I'm going handheld. This might mean that I'm moving in a little bit closer or standing a little bit further away, and I might even dirty up the frame a little bit by putting something in the foreground while I'm interviewing him and moving in and out of focus. Now, this is definitely more of a creative look and a stylistic approach, but I always find that even if you just use this 1 or 2 times in your interview, it can really give an impact into your film that definitely draws the viewer in. For my fourth camera angle, I usually like to get something that's extremely close up with a really shallow depth of field. That way, if I have something in an interview that needs to cut to something really intense and dramatic, I have the option for that. Now, like I said in the beginning of this video, guys, the most important aspect to all of this is making sure that you're extremely organized. It's also really important that your master shot is done very well, because if all else fails and you don't capture really good content on the second, third, and fourth camera angle, you're gonna rely heavily on that master shot. So everything that you shoot there has to not only go through every single one of these questions, but make sure that you go through every single one of those questions really well. And most importantly, you're happy with the responses that you captured on your master shot. I think with the second, third, and fourth camera angle, you could start to become a little bit more lenient, because those are camera angles that are kind of nice to haves, but that master shot needs to be perfect. Now, for the last couple of years, we've been putting together a documentary course that takes you through every step of the filmmaking process, from idea to final edit, and even pitching your film to major streaming platforms. And if you guys are interested in knowing more about that course, I'll leave a link right up here or in the description down below, and you guys can check that out, sign up for the email list, and you guys will be notified as soon as that course drops, hopefully by the end of this year. So I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.